If you've been following my How to Start a New Sourdough Starter series, you might feel like you are ready to do your first bake. So today I'm going to share with you the recipe for this bread. This is my easiest sourdough bread recipe. It's great for a beginner, but it's important to note that if your sourdough starter is still pretty young, it's not going to make incredible bread. It's not going to make great bread. It's going to make okay bread, and it will get better as time goes on. If you are seeing a really good rise and fall after you feed your starter, you can go ahead and try a first bake. I say that if your starter is doubling in size in like the first 6 to 8 hours, then I think you're okay to go ahead and try a first bake. So here are the instructions for making this very easy version of sourdough bread. I have much more complicated recipes that will make even better bread that I can share with you later, but I would start here.
About 24 hours before you want to bake your loaf of bread, you will want to feed your starter to prepare it for baking. I am using my established starter, Millie, here to bake with because my new starter is not quite ready yet. And I start with just a small amount of starter, maybe 15 to 20 grams, and I add to that 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water. This means we will end up with about 115 to 120 grams of starter in the end. 100 is going to go into our bread, and the rest will be left over to keep our starter going. You can use whatever wheat-based flour you like to feed your starter. I do a little bit of whole wheat flour and then mostly bread flour for my feedings. Cover your starter container and then let it sit at room temperature for about 6 to 10 hours until it is really bubbly. You want to use your starter in a bread dough when it is still in this very active, bubbly state. This is mine about 6 hours after feeding. It has more than doubled in size, and I can see it is very vigorous. You want to do this before it starts falling down in the jar. Usually there is a good few hours when it will be in this state. Now we can go ahead and mix our dough. We're going to start with 300 grams of just barely warm water, somewhere around 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and we're going to add to that 100 grams of our active fed starter. This will be almost everything that's in your jar, but don't worry, just the scrapings in your jar are plenty to keep your sourdough starter going. I like to go in with a spatula and break the starter up in the water a little bit before I add the flour. Next up, we're adding 500 grams of preferably bread flour, but if you only have all-purpose flour, that will work too. And our last ingredient is 10 grams of salt. Now we're just going to start mixing this all together with a spatula. In sourdough world, this is considered a low hydration dough, meaning that the amount of water in this dough compared to the flour is pretty low compared to a lot of sourdough recipes you will see. So you're not going to be able to do a lot of the mixing with the spatula. Just kind of get it started and then go in with your hand and start kind of squeezing and massaging it together until you get every last bit of that flour hydrated. I originally wrote this recipe as a no-knead bread recipe, but I do find that it is helpful to go ahead and bring it out on the counter and do some light kneading just to make sure that you get all of that flour hydrated. You don't need to spend a lot of time on this. Just make sure it's cohesive, and then you're going to move it into a clean bowl and put some plastic wrap or a damp towel over the top. You're now going to let this bulk ferment or go through its first rise at room temperature for about 10 to 12 hours. Here is my dough the next morning. It has doubled in size, it is full of air, and we are ready to shape it. Lightly flour your countertop and then very gently start releasing your dough from the bowl so that it flips upside down out on the countertop, taking extra care not to deflate all of the air out of it. Now we are going to gently fold in each side of the dough into a center point and then flip it over so the seam side is down. Gently kind of tuck the sides around so that it is in a nice tight ball, and then you're going to stop shaping so that we don't deflate too much air out of it. Line a medium mixing bowl with a lint-free towel and then dust it with flour. I am using whole wheat flour here because I don't have any rice flour, and I do find that those two flours work best for not sticking, but you can use white flour if that's all you have. Transfer the dough seam side up into the bowl, and then we need to let it rise one more time. Right now, when I press in on it gently with my finger, the indentation springs right back up, and I can tell that there's a lot of tension on the dough. I'm going to give this about 3 or 4 more hours. I want to see that indentation really slowly springing back up, and I want it to feel almost like a marshmallow when I press in on it. Here's the dough 3 hours later, and when I give it a light poke, I can feel that there's a lot more air inside. It almost feels like the texture of a marshmallow, and that indentation is much slower at filling back in. We are ready to bake.
Quick little interjection. When I know my dough is almost finished proofing, when it's in like the last 45 minutes of proofing, I go ahead and prepare my oven. We're going to preheat it at 450 degrees Fahrenheit with some kind of oven-safe pot inside. This can be a Dutch oven, this can be a roasting pan, this can be any kind of oven-safe pot. It doesn't need to be fancy, but this is going to give you the best bake.
When your loaf is done proofing, we're going to gently tip it out onto a piece of parchment paper and then score the top. I like to use a serrated knife if I don't have a bread lom with me, and I'm going to do one really big kind of curved cut across the top. This will allow the loaf to fully expand in the oven and get the biggest rise. Carefully remove your preheated pot from the oven and then gently transfer your loaf on the parchment paper into your pan. The parchment just makes this a lot easier without burning yourself. I am using my Challenger bread pan here, which makes it a lot easier. We will be baking this with the lid on for the first 25 to 30 minutes. The lid will help trap in the steam and moisture from the loaf and keep the crust nice and moist so that it can fully rise before it sets. If I have room in my pan, I also throw in a few ice cubes just for good measure. After about 30 minutes, I'm going to carefully pull the lid off and then continue baking this until I reach my desired color. This usually takes about 15 to 20 more minutes in my oven.
So I brought it to work with me so I could let it cool before I cut into it, because I know nobody wants to hear this, but you're really not supposed to cut into a full loaf of bread if it's still hot. You should really let it cool. It's going to give you the best flavor and texture. But here is the loaf. Just a reminder, this was made with Millie, my very well established sourdough starter, not my beginner, not my new sourdough starter. It's not ready to bake with yet. But I wanted to give you this recipe just in case you were ready to start baking. This is a beginner loaf. It is delicious. It's not going to be the very best loaf of sourdough you've ever had in your life, but it's a really good bread. And it's a great place to start. Level 1. I'll give you more advanced recipes later. Bye. You can find the full detailed recipe of this on my website. If you Google Baker Betty No Knead Sourdough recipe, you'll find it. It has all of the details, everything all written out nicely for you so that you can easily follow along that way. Okay,